Bill, we're now live.
Okay, thank you. Welcome everybody to the Planning Committee on the 10th of February. My apologies, I'm not able to join you in person today, but I have instructed my Deputy Chair, Councillor Rook, to chair the Planning Committee this afternoon. And for the avoidance of doubt, Councillor Rook will be the chair of this committee today and has all the powers that are conferred upon the chairperson. So with that, I'll hand over to Dale, who will no doubt bring in the officers. All yours, Dale.
Thank you, Phil. I'd like to first thank all the members for attending today after we had to adjourn last week's planning committee. Firstly, I'd like to introduce myself. I'm Dale Rook. I'm councillor for Chepstow Castle and Larkfield Ward, and I'm the vice chair of this committee, de facto today's chair. I'd like to introduce the panel here.
Yeah, thank you, Dale. Councillor.
Not yet.
Not yet. Maybe in a future life. Andrew Jones, head of planning, not a councillor.
Sorry. Philip Thomas, Development Services Manager with the council.
Paige Mosley, Solicitor to Planning Committee.
Richard Ray, Paralegal.
Richard Williams, Democratic Services.
Okay, that takes us through the introductions. Item 2, declarations of interest. Any declarations of interest? Oh, sorry. Apologies for absences first.
Yes, Chair. Apologies from Councillors McConnell and Jill Bond.
Thank you. Then we've done declarations of interest, which there are none. Item 3, to confirm for accuracy the minutes of the previous meeting. Could I have...
Happy to confirm, Chair.
Lovely, thank you very much. Tony Eason proposed and Phil Murphy seconded. To consider the planning application reports from the Chief Officer and Community Wellbeing, copies attached, for a application DM 2025-00707, outline planning for one dwelling, one Woodland View, Roggett, and it's over to Phil to introduce.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just trying to get this on full screen. There we go. Is that working now? Yes, there we go. Right, thank you. Let's get to the first slide. So, yeah, an application, as the Chair has outlined, outline planning permission for one dwelling, so it's an outline application. And the land's next to one Woodland View, Roggett, so it fronts onto Grenville Terrace there. So the plot measures 17 metres deep by 7.4 metres wide, and it's inside the Roggett development boundary. It was previously the residential curtilage of the semi-detached property number 1 Woodland View, which is just to the right of it there on that slide. The plot is level, as we'll see on various photos there, and it's surrounded by close bordered fencing, except for the road frontage. And it fronts onto Grenville Terrace and is surrounded by residential properties. So this is an outline application for a single detached dwelling with all matters reserved. The maximum scale parameters that they have to provide at outline stage for the dwelling are that it would be 8.4 metres in length, or in other words in depth, from the front to the back of the site, maximum, 5.6 metres wide, as it's obviously a narrower plot, and 7.3 metres in height, which would equate really to the roof of the neighbouring dwelling. Vehicular access would be from Grenville Terrace, and 2 off-road parking spaces would be provided for the new dwelling, And as part of this application, 2 new off-road parking spaces would also be provided for the host dwelling, 1 Woodland Terrace, a new Woodland View rather, and new timber fencing would be provided to the site boundaries. You can actually see a lot of that's already in situ. In terms of the principle of development, let's have a look at the some more photos. It's looking back with the host property on the right and the neighbour on the left there. That's a bit more of an idea of the plot. And that's looking back with the plot on the left, and there's some terraced properties on the right, and some bungalows behind the foliage there on the right, which all have their own parking. And that's looking back the way you come in towards the site from the main road, and terraces on the left, semis further down on the right. If I go back to the actual site plan, and I'll keep it on that particular block, on the block plan, it's, I think, of help when I go through the presentation. So, so as said, the site is located in the development boundary, within which there's a presumption in favour of new residential development, subject to detailed planning considerations. LDP policies S1 and H1 allow for new residential development to be built inside the development boundaries of Sevenside settlements, including Rogyott. The application needs to be considered against the infill development supplementary planning guidance adopted in November 2019. The supplementary planning guidance, or SPG, sets out that the proposed dwelling must respect the scale, form and massing of existing development in the area. And while a lot of the streets in Rogyott are uniform, in terms of house styles, this area of Grenville Terrace has a more mixed character, featuring a terrace of houses, as we saw in the photograph, and some detached bungalows. It is considered that a 2-storey detached dwelling in this location is acceptable and would not have an adverse impact on the street scene. The footprint of the new dwelling would be slightly smaller than that of the surrounding properties, but the ridge height would be similar to those of the neighbours. The proposed dwelling would reflect the character of the area and continue the established building line. In respect to the distance between buildings, the SPG indicates that proposals need to provide sufficient gaps between buildings to minimise any overbearing or overshadowing impact on the amenity of neighbouring properties. In this case, the plot is of sufficient size to accommodate a new but small dwelling with sufficient parking provision and private amenity space. The rear garden of the new property would have a private amenity area measuring just over 4 metres by 7 metres, which is small but acceptable. There would also be sufficient private amenity space for the host dwelling, as you can see there. The new dwelling would be able to provide adequate privacy to its habitable rooms, which would predominantly face south towards a road and north to the private rear garden. The dwelling immediately to the west of the plot has a blank gable wall, number 4, as you can see in the slide there, has a blank gable wall facing the plot. And there would be about 15 metres between the front elevation of the new dwelling and the front elevations of the terrace properties on the opposite side of the road. The rear elevation of the new dwelling would be over 4 metres from the rear boundary, which overlooks the rear garden of number 2 Woodland View. But that garden area is already overlooked by existing neighbouring dwellings, and this proposal would not exacerbate that situation unduly. There's an existing outbuilding on this common boundary as well, which does provide some privacy to the neighbour. The host dwelling does face the plot, but is at such an angle, so in terms of there, the outlook here, but is at such an angle the new dwelling would not cause a significant loss of light or privacy. And there would be a 1.8 metre high timber fence between the two dwellings. A condition is proposed to provide that there would be no habitable room windows on the side elevations of the proposed dwelling. And consequently, the proposal is considered to accord with the privacy distances outlined in the supplementary planning guidance. In terms of net benefit for biodiversity, the proposal includes a bird nesting box on the gable wall of the house and pollinator plants in the rear garden. A green infrastructure statement has been submitted with the application, which is proportionate to the scale of the development, and the proposal therefore accords with policy NE1 of the LDP. and the requirements of Planning Policy Wales. The application has been amended in response to Highways concerns. Namely, the property has been reduced to a 2-bedroom dwelling, and the existing property has been provided with an on-street parking facility, i.e. for 2 cars. This change reduces the number of vehicles parking on street, with benefits to highway manoeuvring and parking stress. The Highway Authority raises no objection to the outline application, but would expect to see greater detail regarding the construction of the parking facility within the reserve matters. The applicant is advised to begin what we call a Section 184 agreement, that's a drop curb in layman's terms, for the existing property as soon as possible. The proposal meets the objectives of policy MV1 of the LDP and the adopted parking standards, and the Highway Authority offers no objection. In respect of objections received, the Community Council have expressed concerns regarding the increase in traffic and on-street parking, but the increase in traffic resulting from one additional and to be honest, modest dwelling would be minimal given the scale of existing movements in that area. Grenville Terrace and Woodland View is a no-through road that serves around just under 40 residential properties. It is narrow, and this serves to reduce traffic speeds. And the Highway Authority has not objected to the proposal, and the local road network has capacity to accommodate the very modest increase in vehicle movements resulting from one small additional dwelling. The proposal involves providing 2 new parking spaces, as we've seen, for the host dwelling, as well as 2 spaces for the new dwelling, and therefore the proposal will improve the parking situation in the area. The Community Council and residents have also got concerns about highway safety during the construction phase, especially with regards to construction traffic blocking the pavement. The construction phase will only be for a temporary period, and a construction management plan will be required by condition that will outline parking arrangements for construction traffic and the delivery of materials as well as construction times. Finally, the Community Council is concerned that the proposal is too large for the plot. This is an outline application, so the precise dimensions are not known at this stage, but the indicative site plan shows the maximum scale parameters that indicate the new dwelling can be the same height as adjoining properties, and that there is adequate space on the plot for the dwelling with amenity space and the required parking provision. Although on the small size, the plot is of sufficient size to accommodate a modest dwelling, and the size of the proposed new dwelling will be broadly similar to those other properties in this part of Roggett. Bearing in mind there's a terrace of properties nearby. Local residents are also concerned about the increase in traffic and on-street parking. There's only a narrow pavement on one side of Grenville Terrace in this area, so it's important that the pavement is not blocked during the construction phase. But that will be actually managed via that condition for construction traffic management plan. There is an unauthorised fence that has been erected along the front boundary of the host dwelling, which we've seen in some of the photos there. The applicant has indicated that they will reduce the height of this fence imminently, but that action is also indicated as part of the block plan for the current application, and a condition set out in late correspondence is suggested to ensure that this is secured before works commence on the new building itself. So we would recommend approval of the outline application subject to conditions, including those 2 set out in late correspondence, 8 and 9 in the late correspondence you will have read. Condition 8 is to ensure permitted development rights are removed so that we can manage any future proposed extensions to the property or outbuildings, especially given that there's very little scope to create any change to the building once it's been built. And condition 9 is to ensure that the parking spaces for the host property and that fence is actually reduced in height, and the spaces are provided before works commence on the plot. And also there is a section 106 to secure a financial contribution towards affordable housing in the locality. So we therefore recommend approval. Thank you.
Thanks, Phil. Just to remind members that you're still to use the raise hand function if you wish to speak. So I'll open the floor up to you lot. Councillor Butler.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'm very glad that the close boarded fence on the front there is being considered, because that is an abomination, frankly. I didn't make a site visit, but I think the neighbours opposite must be quite put out by that. Nothing, the rest of the road is very, very low at the front. This is an outline planning application. Does this mean that that boarded fence will be shortened quicker, sooner rather than later, or would that have to wait? Because I think it's pretty awful. And that's all I wanted to say on this, actually.
It's actually unauthorised. When we were there, the applicant actually did advise that they were willing to do that in very soon. In fact, he was measuring the fence when we were there. What we've tried to do as part of the application is secure that improvement before any works commence on this particular development. In the event that nothing happens with this plot for some time, we have got the ability to seek its reduction. Any fence over 1 metre high in that location needs planning permission, and that hasn't been applied for. I'm pretty confident that the applicant will do that voluntarily, but we have got the prospect of being able to take enforcement action if nothing materialises from this plot, if it gets outline approval in the shorter term. If nothing materialises, we can, prompt the applicant to take more immediate action via potential enforcement proceedings.
Thank you very much. That reassures me. Thank you.
Thank you,
Councillor
Chair.
Howells.
Thank you. I noticed that that they'll be presumably putting a drop curb in for the driveway to the property. I noticed that the pavement at 4 is it doesn't continue. There's a recess outside their proposed development. I just wondered whether that could be continued to make that slight bit of pavement a little bit wider there, where the drop curb would be.
That would be a matter for highways. They haven't identified that as an issue that's required. There will have to be a permission at 184, was that what I said, under the Highways Act, to drop the curb both for the host property and for the proposed property. But they haven't identified any need to upgrade any of the footways there. So, and in the absence of our expert highway authority actually advising us that is necessary to enable the development to go ahead, we wouldn't really be in a condition to condition anything like that.
Thanks, Phil. Yeah, it just seemed an opportunity. If they're going to do work on it, it would be wise to make it wider as well. And just out of curiosity, will it be known as Woodlands View or Granville Terrace property?
That'd be a matter for the street naming and numbering team. I suspect it makes more sense to tag it to Grenville Terrace, but that would be a matter for the applicant or developer to then organise with the street naming and numbering team. But it does make sense from what.
Thanks, Phil. Thanks.
Okay, Councillor McKenna.
Thank you, Chair. Just wanted a bit more clarification. Condition 7. There should be no habitable room windows on the east or west elevations of the new dwelling. I'm assuming that they could put things in like frosted glass, like bathroom windows, but not bedroom windows. Just wondered if you could clarify if my understanding is correct, please. Thank you.
Yes, Councillor McKenna. So a bathroom wouldn't be a habitable room, but you would expect it to have frosted glass. A habitable room is something like a living room or a bedroom where there's more potential for there to be a loss of privacy from either somebody, moving around using that space, or it's a two-way thing, isn't it? Loss of privacy to the potential occupiers of the property and the neighbouring properties. So there wouldn't be a great deal of outlook either, particularly on the one side, So you wouldn't really want a habitable room in those locations. I mean, if they do want to come in and put a habitable room in there later, it means that they've got to apply to us to do it, and then we can see whether it's warranted or not. But I think, really, given the limitations of the plot, you wouldn't really. It wouldn't be particularly appropriate to have a habitable room, certainly on the first floor, on either gable elevation.
Councillor Bryn.
Hi, Dale. Can you just confirm for me that we're confident that there's space for parking at the front of this dwelling that won't, where the vehicles won't block either access to the side, to the front door, or overhang the pavement? It's quite difficult for me to tell from the block planning. And also, can you tell me the net benefit for biodiversity? Would that also apply for the host dwelling, as we're conditioning planning for parking on the host building? It's just, I know there's been a lot of flooding locally, and I'm keen not to encourage them to kind of remove all the greenery in their front, and therefore, if the net benefit for biodiversity does apply for the host dwelling as well, perhaps that would encourage them to keep as much greenery there as possible. Diolch.
Yeah, the site is deep enough for them to get a 5-metre car parking space in the front, which is for a standard parking space. There is room between however they arrange it, but presumably they'll have one space at either, if you like, side of the front door, and then they can walk in the middle to it. So there would be room for them to come in and out to the plot. It is narrow, but there is sufficient room for them to come in and out and park without overhanging the highway. And highways would have looked at that when they made their comments. And in terms of biodiversity, net gain enhancement, I don't think it'd be reasonable. The reason we've got the host property to provide parking is we know there's a stress in the area, so this reduces the amount of parking on there and is necessary to ensure the development is acceptable. We can't. I think it would be disproportionate and unreasonable to insist the host property then provides biodiversity enhancement as a result of a plot next to them. I don't think that would be in the spirit of the condition circular, and it would be disproportionate. Yeah, that's my interpretation of that.
Okay. Flooding is also a pressure on the local area as well. Is my concern. Okay, Joe.
Councillor Garrett.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Phil. Although I wasn't on the visit yesterday, I do know the area quite well. I have parked on that road before, and I do know the parking stress that Phil mentioned is quite important. My concern is the vehicles getting in and out. If they go in forwards and then reverse out with the footpath, I'm surprised that highways didn't kind of qualify that a bit more. Whether they might. It would be better obviously to reverse in, so you're going out in a forward motion so you can see pedestrians on the pavement, school children coming home, going to school, or whether they could have some kind of mirror fitted to the side so that they can see pedestrians, because my concern would be access in and out of that parking spaces and how that would be. We could maybe condition that to make it safe for pedestrians and anyone else using that footpath. Thank you.
I mean, there's multiple driveways along there which haven't got the opportunity to revert to turn and come out in a forward gear from their driveways in Roggett. There's no objection from highways in terms of the manoeuvring. They can reverse into the site. There's an opportunity for them to do that, and they don't advocate generally mirrors being used highways. So. I mean, in the absence of any objection in terms of manoeuvring from highways, then I think it'd be difficult to argue that it's going to cause any problem in terms of road movements, traffic movements. We can also ensure that any boundary enclosure to the left, as you're looking at the frontage of the site, so if they were manoeuvring out, is low enough for people to see anybody coming along any footway there. And people generally, if they, we've got to look at it as if it's a reasonable person using that property. They'll be going at very low speeds if they are actually reversing out of the property. And as I say, it's no worse than a multitude of accesses which are already having that sort of arrangement in that area.
Councillor Murphy.
Thank you, Chair. I think Tony was in front of me, but never mind. I've been looking at this. I think there is a distinct benefit in providing that sort of property in this area, coupled with the fact that it is going to take some pressure off the on-street parking situation. So at this stage, I'm happy to recommend that we go to the vote and approve the application. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, we've got Councillor Powell has also seconded your suggestion, Phil. I'm still going to listen to other people's concerns, so I'll go to Councillor Eason.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I know this particular corner road very well. It's right on the corner of Granville into Woodland View. Woodland Terrace, whatever it is, and the number 2 Woodland is at a 90-degree angle to this particular property. And I noticed that the property already on Granville Terrace doesn't have any windows on that side overlooking Woodland View. You've agreed to have a 1.8 metre fence between the two properties. This is an outline plan application. Can we be sure that the full application won't include any windows on the lower side rather than the upper side of the property if it comes back for planning application, a full planning application?
Is that the ground floor, you mean? Yeah, I mean, what the condition is there to achieve is to reduce the likelihood of, remove any likelihood of habitable rooms particularly on the first floor. But I don't see any harm in them, say, having a bathroom window or a toilet window, for instance, which is obscure glaze on the ground floor, because it would be obscured by the fence, certainly further back from the frontage anyway, or possibly a small kitchen window or something on the side, because that's not likely to cause any privacy. It's the first floor windows I think we've got to be more concerned about, and the fact that we've removed any rights to form habitable room windows is something that we can then manage. But we'd manage this under the reserve matters and look at the design of it and where the windows are located to ensure that there's no loss of privacy if outline permission is granted at that reserve matters stage.
Yeah, but we've got to be mindful of the fact this overlooks 2 sides rather than just 1 side, haven't we? Okay, thank you.
Councillor Howells.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks for letting me come back again. Just really on the driveway, the hard standing, can we request that they are permeable? Is that something we can request?
Yeah, we can. That will come in under the reserve matters. So, but that's something we would normally do as a matter of course to ensure that surface water is managed properly. I'm not sure this needs SAB because it's probably under 100 square metres. But we can certainly take advice from that team and ensure that there's a suitable surface water is managed in a sustainable manner, including permeable surfacing.
Thanks.
Councillor Buckler.
Thank you, Chair. There are obviously concerns locally about increase in traffic and off-road parking, access, and these are sort of material concerns for people already living here. Are you content that we have in place for the outline planning enough sort of safeguards, design safeguards and parameter controls in what is a very tight space for building a dwelling? It is very narrow, isn't it? And will the reserve matters be the provision for them be strong enough. I just have concerns. I'm taking on board, you know, local feeling, and you know, they're not to be lightly dismissed.
Yes, in a nutshell, yes, there are enough controls. We've got maximum scale parameters, so they can't build beyond what the maximum scale parameters are. They've demonstrated by indicative detail that they can get it is a small plot, 2-bedroom property on here with a small garden and parking in front for 2 spaces. But then we control the detail of that in the reserve matters. So that's often the phase that most local residents are interested in, because they see what the detailed layout, the building design and appearance is, where the windows are going, what the roof shape is, etc. So yes, we have sufficient control within the ambit of the reserve matters to make sure that it doesn't harm the amenity of the area, and that it works in terms of scale, layout, materials, and all the other considerations that go into the reserve matter, Councillor Buckler, whilst respecting that there were concerns locally, which is partly why we've conditioned this quite carefully, including those 2 conditions in late correspondence.
Okay, thank you, Philip. Thank you.
Sorry, and there is a construction management plan condition number 4 to ensure that, albeit short term, but the construction traffic is managed sensibly and considerately for the local population.
Okay, I see nobody else wishing to speak.
Can I seek advice from the legal side? I've listened to the debate. It's quite constructive, but I want to abstain from this particular decision. Would that be okay? Because I know the people next door. Best if I abstain, isn't it?
It's a decision for you, Councillor Easton, if you would like to abstain.
I'll abstain, okay. Thank you.
Okay, if we could go to the vote then, please. I have to inform you that Councillor McKenna has dropped out for a portion of the discussion and therefore is unable to vote.
God.
Councillor McKenna, it's not appearing on my screen, but is appearing on the screen, on the big screens there. So I don't know if there's a technical issue with that.
It's on my screen.
Yeah, I've been here the whole time, so I haven't dipped out.
Sorry, Councillor McKenna, it did dip off on our screen during the debate, only for a few seconds, but obviously because you weren't present for the duration, we have to ask you not to vote.
Okay, no problem, thank you.
Okay, if we're all done.
So that is approved. 10 for approval, 1 against approval, and 1 abstain. Apologies. Sorry, it's not loaded on my screen, so I'm looking at a colleague's. It's 10 for approval, none against approval, and 1 abstain.
Okay, then we move on to the next application DM 2025000783, change of use of specific internal areas of the existing hotel, use class C1, to a house in multiple occupancy, comprising 9 bedrooms for occupation by up to 15 persons, including minor internal alterations. No alterations or works are proposed to the exterior of the building of Greenman Packers, 13 Beaufort Square, Chepstow.
Thank you. So this application relates to the property 13 Beaufort Square in the town central shopping area. It was also known as Raglan Lodge. and also as the Green Man Backpackers, which was its last use. And it's a Grade 2 star listed building within the conservation area. In 2011, planning permission was granted for a change of use of a former social club with a retail use as well into a backpacker hotel. But the building has been vacant for around, well, it's over 2 years now. Let's look at the slides. That's the property. So this application is seeking full permission for a change of use from a hotel guest house use, which was a use class C1, to a house in multiple occupation, an HMO, comprising 9 bedrooms for occupation of up to 15 people and including minor alterations. No alterations or works are proposed to the exterior of the building, and at the rear of the property is a 2-storey annex, which is that sort of back part there, which you can see here. See there. Have a look at the slides. That's the front. That's actually part of a solicitor's at the front. So the main part of the property, which is the backpackers, is towards the rear of that. So yeah, so you see the rear of it. This is from the back, from the car park, the main Wells Street car park. This part isn't part of the application. That's a separate part of a separate application for one dwelling, one separate self-contained dwelling. And those are the floor plans, a little bit small. The idea that this is the part which is going to be the hostel, and it's over 3 floors, hence the number of bedrooms. And then that shows the rear. So there's going to be 3 parking spaces in the back there. You could informally get more parking over here, actually. And then this is the annex at the back, as we call it, which is subject to a separate proposal for a single dwelling with a space for them in there. So we're looking at 3 spaces for the actual HMO itself. Also cycle provision and bin store here in the back. I'll leave it at that for the moment. So, so at the rear of the property, that was that 2-storey annex. It's proposed that this annex will be reinstated to its former use as a self-contained dwelling, but that's subject to a separate planning application. An on-site provision of 3 parking spaces, as we've seen in that slide there, along with dedicated refuse and cycle storage, would be provided at the rear of the site. In respect of the principle of development, there is no specific policy within the adopted LDP that focuses on HMOs. However, an HMO as a type of housing is classed under the use class order as use class C4. LDP policy S1 sets out the strategic aim for the authority in relation to the housing delivery, in relation to housing delivery, and provides that the main focus for new housing developments is within or adjoining the main towns, which include Chepstow. Additionally, LDP policy H1 relates to residential development within the main towns and sets out the development boundaries have been drawn for those main towns, 7-side settlements and rural secondary settlements, and within which new build residential development or redevelopment or conversion to residential or subdivision of large dwellings, or reuse of accommodation such as vacant floors in town centres will be permitted subject to detailed planning considerations and other policies of the LDP. LDP policy H9 relates specifically to flat conversions, so not absolutely applicable, but broadly applicable in terms of the character of this sort of use, and it lists a number of criteria for proposals to be considered against, which are referred to in the officer report. In conclusion, there is no objection in principle to the proposed HMO unit within the settlement boundary for Chepstow. The proposed HMO will provide shared accommodation that meets the growing local demand for flexible and affordable housing. It could accommodate a diverse range of occupants, including young professionals, key workers, and others who may not have access to traditional housing options. The application explains that the hotel has experienced a significant and sustained decline in demand for its backpacker-style accommodation since the onset of the COVID pandemic. This downturn ultimately led to its permanent closure over 2 years ago due to lack of demand and financial unsustainability. Reconfiguring this part of the building into an HMO would make effective use of underutilised space while contributing to the sustainability and vitality of the local housing market. The result of this application would bring a vacant and deteriorating part of the building back into active and beneficial use, supporting the long-term conservation and sustainable use of this important heritage asset in accordance with both national and local planning and heritage policies. As the premises is Grade 2 star listed, the planning application is accompanied by an application for listed building consent. And no alterations to the external fabric are proposed, ensuring that the character and appearance of this part of the conservation area will remain unaffected. The Council's Heritage Management team has confirmed that there is no objection to the proposed change of use or the limited internal alterations proposed. Accordingly, the proposal complies with LD Policy HE1. The proposed change of use to an HMO within the town centre is not expected to have any unacceptable impact on the living conditions of neighbouring residents. While the proposed HMO use falls under a different use class than the existing hotel backpackers use, both share a similar residential character. Importantly, no additional windows are proposed, ensuring that the privacy of adjacent residential properties is maintained, and therefore no issues of overlooking or loss of privacy are anticipated. The proposal is considered to comply with LDP policies DES1 and EP1. In terms of parking needs, there are currently 2 double bedrooms accommodating 4 persons, with a combination of bunk beds and single beds in the remaining rooms, accommodating for the actual backpackers hotel a further 31 persons, so 35 in total. The proposed change of use would create 9 bedrooms accommodating up to 15 persons, which is significantly fewer than the current capacity. In addition, 3 on-site parking spaces at the rear are proposed to serve the new units. The site is located within the town centre and does include 3 designated parking spaces, as said. Highways comments are in late correspondence, and they agree that given the site's central location, future occupiers will benefit from excellent access to local amenities and sustainable transport options. Public transport provision in the town centre is considered good, with frequent bus services, and there is convenient access to the Chepstow train station. Consequently, there are no significant concerns regarding the sustainability of the site. And in terms of visitor or private vehicle parking, the property is situated adjacent to one of the largest public car parks in Chepstow, which can accommodate any anticipated parking requirements. The proposal is considered to be in accordance with policy MV1, and this approach is consistent with the placemaking principles set out in Planning Policy Wales. To promote sustainable travel, secure and covered cycle parking for 15 bicycles will be provided within the rear garden area, and the site also benefits from outdoor amenity space at the rear and the side, and the rear area would also accommodate discrete refuse and recycling storage, ensuring these facilities are contained within the site and do not detract from the wider character of the area, which is a conservation area. The concerns raised by Chepstow Town Council have been noted. However, there is currently no policy within the adopted LDP that restricts or sets a threshold for the level of HMO accommodation within Monmouthshire. Each application must therefore be assessed on its own merits. So we would recommend approval of this application subject to the conditions in the officer report. Thank you.
Thank you, Phil. I'll open the floor. Councillor Buckler. You're on mute.
Thank you. Thank you for telling me that. In the absence of any adopted policy on houses in multiple occupation, you know, how do we ensure that we're not just, you know, putting applications through by default without any sort of structure to them? You know, are we satisfied that this grade 2 star listed building within central shopping area, and you know, will it undermine the balance between residential tourism accommodation and the sort of town centre vitality? By just sort of plucking it as an application on its own, it's difficult, I feel, for us to do a so coherent resolution to this. So that those are my concerns, and you know, I understand what you've said about the fact that as a backpacker establishment that it was finding life tough, and that's why they closed. But there are other options for tourism. I just you know, I'm not against houses of multiple occupation per se by any stretch of the imagination, but you know, how do we get the balance right? Those are my concerns.
I think you have to look at the character of the area, look at the general land use pattern in the area. We haven't got a significant number of HMOs in that part of Chepstow. I think if there were problems stemming from HMOs in that area, we'd have had lots of objections to this application. We haven't actually had any objections to this proposal. I think which probably speaks volumes really for how this application has been received by local businesses and residents. We haven't got a policy that limits concentrations of HMOs. That may be because we haven't actually got that many. If that starts developing as a trend and we start finding that there's antisocial behaviour or amenity issues stemming from those, specifically from those uses, then we may see the need for something to be put in place to address that. But we really haven't got that sort of significant concentration. So we've looked at it on its merits. It is a form of low-cost housing for a lot of people who can't, as I say, afford the conventional way of buying or renting a private property, and it does provide flexible sort of accommodation for a variety of different groups of people, not just people who might be struggling financially, but younger maybe professionals who are in the area, who've got maybe a short-term contract locally and may need accommodation. So we have looked at it in the round, but we feel this is an appropriate form of housing. It doesn't remove the frontage, which is still a commercial property, which is the solicitors, and it doesn't harm the character of the area, and we don't feel it will harm the amenity area. So I hope I answered that as best I can.
Thank you, Philip.
Okay, Councillor McKenna.
Thank you, Chair. I don't have an issue with this application. I will be supporting it. I do think that HMOs certainly have a place, and I would welcome them in somewhere central, such as this location in Chepstow. I am a little bit concerned, though, that we haven't had all of the responses from our consultees in the report. We haven't had one from Highways or Environmental Health. And I do think that when we receive reports that we should have the full picture. Now I'm perfectly capable of reading through this and understanding and making my own decisions when it comes to things like highways and the parking. But I do think that moving forward, we should really have all responses in the report just so that we do see the full picture. Thank you.
Yeah, the highways was in late correspondence, Councillor McKenna. They had no objection to the application, so we did report that in late correspondence. In terms of environmental health, they would have to register the HMO themselves anyway, but they have their own sets of standards that they would apply in that instance to registered HMOs. But so we wouldn't sort of rely, if you like, fundamentally on what they've got to say on this. That there would be the need to comply with their own separate legislation in order to register the HMO. So it shouldn't impact on the planning merits of it in terms of amenity, etc.
Chair, I've put my hand up twice, and for some reason it's been taken down automatically.
I was going to comment after Councillor Bryn just to see if you wanted to say anything, but seeing as your hand has gone up twice that I've noticed and come down again, I'll let you go now.
Thank you, Chair. It was my privilege to have the site visit recently, and I was amazed at the quality, and I think the owners ought to be congratulated on that. And on my discussions with the owner, he's made it quite clear that this place will be managed correctly and in a way that will be better for those residents. The only thing I would ask is that I'm almost confused that how many dwellings are allowed or should be at a standard for this type of application.
Well, I suppose you'd have to look at the size of the building, really, and it will need to be registered, so there will be certain standards there. Some of the rooms will be double rooms. There'll also be, as we could see, there were little small dormitory type rooms there where there were bunk beds. But that's not a planning matter per se. It's more of a registration matter with people like environmental health, and the fire service would need to be involved in that sort of aspect of it. So, but I'd be very surprised this wouldn't meet that. Bearing in mind the hotel hostel, if you can call it, that use preceding it would also have had to have abided by fire regulations and all sorts of other management measures.
The other question I would ask, is how many car parking spaces? We've only got 3 allocated here, and okay, if there it was a holiday unit, you would expect them to use the car park, but they would probably have to pay. As these are residents, you wouldn't expect them to pay for car parking charges. So, would there be an option of having perhaps more than 3 car parking spaces?
That space at the back is actually capable of accommodating probably about 6 spaces, I think, when we were there looking at it. But bearing in mind this is a sustainable location, we're trying to actually play less emphasis on the car and the car use. Options for public transport are really good in this location with train and buses around. So we've placed heavy reliance on the concepts in Planning Policy Wales, the latest edition, which seeks to promote less use of the car, more use of walking, cycling, public transport, hence the cycle store in the rear, so that there's no overriding need to provide a lot of parking for this sort of use in this location. But we have provided some parking in case a small number of the occupiers do have cars, but there's no overriding need for them to have a car in this sort of highly sustainable location for Monmouthshire.
Councillor Bryn.
Diolch yn fawr. And my apologies for dropping out. My team's just frozen, so I wasn't able to take part. I've just got 2 little queries, really. Do you think it'd be worthwhile us to actually, I know you said that you didn't think there was a need to do to write a HMO policy, but I do feel perhaps it might be worth us to act proactively and start considering writing one now before there are problems. It seems a bit, rather than starting putting one together in a reactionary manner and then trying to undo wrongs that have occurred. And my only other query really was, will this? I'm pro HMO, and I think this is a great place for it personally, with so close to the train station, and it's a lovely building. We as we saw on our visit. But will this leave us a shortage of tourist accommodation? Considering I thought we were proposing to build a hotel slightly just outside Chepstow, because there was a shortage of hotel accommodation, whereas this is a far better placed hotel space. So yeah, that was just my query. That was all. Diolch.
Different voice.
Different voice. Yeah, I think in terms of the HMO and the need for a policy, I think it really has to be evidence-driven. There are authorities in England and Wales, more so generally where there's student accommodation and university towns and cities where there is higher concentrations of HMOs, and they can have an impact on the character and amenity of an area. They can quite significantly change. Now, there are, say, ad hoc applications we've had in Chepstow, but these are really small numbers. And for us to consider a policy and have an evidence base to deliver a policy because HMOs were fundamentally changing the character of an area, as is the case with, colleagues across South Wales in Newport, Swansea, Cardiff, etc., where there are those sort of issues. I think that's the reason at this stage is they're simply, whilst they may appear, they pop up now and again, and often they will. And in this case, this hasn't, but some cases they can draw levels of public interest. And in this case, this hasn't. But I think I said we don't have the evidence base that there is a proliferation of these that are in any way harmful to the character of an area. That's the reason why at this stage why it's not about not being proactive. Its policy should be evidence based, and we're not in that space yet. Take on board also the points made in terms of possible land allocations elsewhere in Chepstow as part of the RLDP process for accommodation and hotels. I mean, this is quite a different offering, and I think there's obviously a mix of tourism accommodation offerings and sizes and scales that are needed. What was offered here, very high standard, I think we all take that, was of a much smaller scale than that's potentially to come through the RLDP process. We do work closely with colleagues in our tourism department, but in this case, it's not an area where there's sort of tourism restrictions in terms of loss of tourism. So I think we've assessed it under, taking a planning balance view in terms of, as Phil has outlined earlier, the sort of prevailing character and use, land use in that area. And we don't think that the loss of this smaller tourism offering would be prejudicial to that. So I think it's one, without defined policies in that respect, it's a planning balance. And hopefully we've articulated that we don't feel as a land use there's a harm, or in terms of harm to our wider tourism offering. So hopefully that's some reassurance and sort of a bit of a useful background in terms of why we haven't pursued or are pursuing specific HMO policies.
Yeah. Is it okay if I come back on that?
Yes, please.
Yeah, I was just saying, if it's been assessed that there's a shortage of, has there been assessment that there's a shortage of beds, or has there been assessment that there's a shortage of particular types of accommodation then for us to propose that we build a hotel on a green belt site when there's, and then also proposing that we withdraw tourist accommodation closer to the heart of Chepstow itself. That's all, just so I can satisfy that, because that's my only concern about this development really is that deal.
I think in this case it's that it's not an area that there's a policy framework in place to preserve that tourism. It's only in the last, I think it was 2011, sort of inherited that tourism use, and it's not an area where there's a sort of policy framework to preserve that. So we've got to look at it. The application is now, in this instance, is before us to bring in a new use, a similar use, and it's in the residential sort of C use. But I think, say, that the larger allocations that come through the RLDP are quite separate to this isolated instance of a loss of one smaller offering. That, say, had it been, there was a policy framework where tourism was to be safeguarded, we'd have to balance that and that loss of that facility against that policy criteria. We don't have that in this instance, so that's why I say it's back to the planning balance of this case that's before us. Larger strategic aims of the RLDP is an evidence-based exercise that is about to go through examination. We'll have to justify that through that examination process. But for members today, they need to make a decision based on the current policy framework that's relevant to that specific site.
Councillor Webb.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair. For me, this is an ideal location for this facility. There are hotels fairly near. I think it's ideal, there's transport available, and obviously the applicants have done a lot of research into the use of this building, and I think it's great that it's going to be occupied and not left any longer. We've got enough empty buildings in Chepstow as it is, and I think that and I'd like to move approval, please.
Thank you very much, Councillor Webb. Councillor Eason.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just one quick question. Have Monmouthshire's housing team been involved in this, or is this an independent enterprise?
Sorry, I don't know that. It could be independent, yeah. I don't think they have been involved, but I can't confirm that. Sorry, Councillor Eason.
If there's nobody else wishing to ask a question, then I'll put it to the vote.
But did we have a seconder? I'm happy to second.
Okay, we've proposed by Councillor Webb and seconded by Councillor Butler.
Okay, so that is approved, 12 for approval.
Moving on now then to Planning Inspectorate Appeals decisions, and it's Andrew.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I'll just wait for the slides to come up, just to provide a little bit of context. So yeah, just a few appeal decisions, all actually with a sort of a common theme actually of heritage. So this first one in Lanarth, this was a householder appeal. So it's within the conservation area, 2-storey side extension and single-storey rear extension. No issues with us in terms of the single-storey rear extension. It was the larger extension to the side that was the concern within the character and appearance of the conservation area. We felt that wasn't preserved. There is also a listed building to the south of it as well. So that element was withheld planning permission, and that was replicated with the inspector's decision. They looked at it afresh, and it's effectively a split decision to grant permission to the single-storey rear extension and withhold planning permission for the works to the side, given the impact on the wider conservation area. So that's a positive result. So the next scheme, this was in respect to a listed building, and so the appeals were against listed building consent and planning permission, and it's for extension that continues there. Perhaps the next slide will show, hopefully, an extension that was, you can see that the difference between before and after. So that was refused, and again that was upheld at appeal in terms of the impact on the character setting of the listed building. So another positive decision. You can see that's the location there of it. The last site, which covers actually quite I'm sure if you've had a chance to read through the inspector's decisions, they're quite lengthy reports on what at face value seem like quite small amount of works. So there's 2 appeals, one against a refusal of listed building consent, and 1 against non-determination of the planning application. So just sort of simply, the list of building consents covered various different elements, including some internal works, but also included air source heat pumps in a higher location on the building. Hopefully the next slide may show their original location that the listed building was determined on. So that was they were shown in that location, and the listed building consent was refused on that basis. So the inspector agreed with that element, but the other works, various other sort of works within the listed building schedule were allowed. The planning appeal, there was a different location chosen for this remained a live ongoing application after that refusal. So there was amendments made. The inspector does a reasonable job of sort of setting out the sort of chronology of this case. It was a sort of very sensitive site, and there were sort of a lot of sort of complexities attached to it behind the scenes. So probably not the forum to go into that in this sort of public setting. Ultimately, the application and appeal was allowed, and with conditions, certainly in regards to the sort of air source heat pump, and there's a window on the rear elevation. The applications for costs were refused on the listed building consent. They were allowed on the planning application, and those costs, would just clarify, relate only to the appeal proceedings only. But there were, say, some sort of complexities and sensitivities around that. And as perhaps if members have got any queries on that, I'm happy to have a conversation, but that's probably best done. If you wanted to set something up with myself, I'm happy to sort of run through those. But the inspector's decision provides their reasoning for that award.
All right, thank you, Andrew. That concludes our business for today. I'd like to thank you all for attending, and I'll catch you on the next one.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Chair. Well done. Thank you.